Hi there, I'm Nicola Enoch and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share with you my experience around discovering my baby has Down syndrome and indeed that of many others, and how we as an organisation, Positive About Down Syndrome, can work with you to ensure new and expectant parents have an accurate contemporary understanding of Down syndrome in modern Britain. So I'm mum to Emily, who is now 19, and Tom, who is rapidly approaching 16. And I think it's fair to say I have become immersed in the Down syndrome community, setting up and running a regional charity, the Ups of Downs, since 2006, a national network of support groups for more than 5 years, and since 2017, Positive About Down syndrome. Okay, so I thought it might be nice to introduce you to my son, who's going to tell you a little about himself. So can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Tom Enoch.
And tell us a little about what you enjoy doing.
I like doing CrossFit.
Yeah.
I like snorkeling, and I like West Brom with my dad.
Ah, you love going to the baggies, don't you? That's true. How are they doing?
Very well.
Excellent. And when you're older, Tom, have you got any ideas what you'd like to do when you finish school and college?
Yes, grow a beard,
Yeah.
get a man bun, and live in a flat.
16 years ago, when I was pregnant at 39, I was extremely worried and concerned about the risk of having a baby with Down syndrome. Indeed, we paid to have private tests to ensure we didn't. And I can vividly recall at the 20-week anomaly scan, the sonographer expressing concern that baby may have talipes, and that could be indicative of a chromosomal disorder. It was a Friday afternoon and we were immediately booked in for an amniocentesis the following week. There was no real discussion, it was just the course of action. And I can remember over the weekend Googling Down syndrome and talipes and thinking that I could probably cope with talipes. There may well be corrective surgery, but Down syndrome I wasn't so sure of. However, prior to having Emily, who by then was 3.5 years old and desperate to be a big sister, I'd suffered 4 miscarriages and knew that an amniocentesis could well trigger a miscarriage. And so I persuaded myself that surely I'd had my share of bad luck and fate wouldn't be so cruel, that this time everything would be okay. And so on the Monday morning, I can remember phoning and cancelling the amnio. And to this day, I think that's probably the best decision I've ever made. Tom was delivered at 10:04 on a Monday morning in August 2004. And for almost 24 hours, I was euphoric. Emily now had a gorgeous baby brother. This was all I'd ever really wanted, was to have children. But Tom was less than a day old when a paediatrician awkwardly and clumsily expressed concern that he may have Down syndrome. She asked me if I thought my precious longed-for baby boy looked normal. My world fell apart and I was offered absolutely no support to rebuild it. Words failed to express the complete, utter despair and devastation I felt. Gone was the beautiful baby boy I'd held the day before, and instead replaced with this unknown entity. A baby society and medical professionals led me to believe I didn't want, who junior doctors were now queuing up to examine, to spot the markers. He'd become a medical exhibit, and I was becoming more and more distant from him. Midwives and doctors were asking, "Didn't you know? Hadn't you had the tests?" Inferring, had we done so, Tom wouldn't be here. We considered having him adopted. After all, it was what friends of friends had done the year before at the same hospital. And on the Tuesday night, I remember whilst Tom was in Skaboo, being alone in the side room, grieving for the baby I'd hoped for and expected. And it actually crossed my mind whether it would be better for us all if Tom didn't survive. The maternal bond, the absolute unconditional love I'd felt for my baby had been severed, and it took a very long time for me to fall back in love with my baby and to start to question what was so wrong with him having Down syndrome. Why had a midwife cried and consoled me? And why do we as a society screen and inevitably terminate? And here we are, almost 16 years later, and sadly discriminatory language and attitudes continue to prevail. I think as a society we need to consider the direction in which antenatal screening is moving. I recently heard Professor Winston advise that in his view, modern medicine has failed to recognise the potential for babies with Down syndrome, and that modern obstetrics has become a search and destroy mission. In 2017, I created Positive About Down Syndrome, a website full of stories and photos written by parents and young people with Down syndrome. New and expectant parents are all too often overwhelmed by the medical model, so this provides the social model, the lived experience. We've developed a range of literature and just published a book, Nobody Told Me, The Truth About Down Syndrome, which we'd be delighted to provide to your maternity units. We understand the importance of peer support and have created a closed Facebook page exclusively for expectant mums, whether with a high chance or confirmed result, as well as a new parents page. We also have a page for midwives and those working in maternity services, to which you're all invited. An area that really should be considered is language. The impact of language should never be underestimated on expectant and new parents. I'd consider myself a reasonably well-educated person, but know how influenced I was by the language and the attitudes of the medical professionals who were there to guide and support me. You know, when I was at my most vulnerable, being told that my baby had an abnormality, the risk of having one of these babies with Down syndrome or a Downs baby, really compounded my fear and led me to believe that there was something desperately wrong with having Down syndrome. I've learned now there's absolutely nothing wrong with Tom, but everything wrong with the attitude and language used around people with Down syndrome. So I know people, get hoity-toity about language police and all the rest, but we've looked at it in labour with failure to dilate and poor obstetric history, etc. It's critical that that practitioners look at their own attitudes and consider the language they use. Public Health England a while back, issued guidance that the word risk should be replaced by chance. Yet I've done freedom of information and discovered that the majority of trusts still use the word risk. And I know how strongly, it just perpetuates fear around Down syndrome. So we would strongly advocate the use of neutral, unbiased terminology. So we would always advocate the use of person-first language. A baby or a child with Down syndrome, never the Downs baby in Bay 3, for example. And it's worth considering that it's not necessary to keep repeating that baby has Down syndrome. It is something once parents have been advised they will remember. So do bear that in mind. And when it comes to sharing the news that baby has or may have Down syndrome, do be of the mindset that you are sharing news. It's not breaking bad news. So always offer your congratulations, refer to the baby by their name, and, use the usual small talk that you would with any new or expectant parent. Be confident that there's absolutely nothing to be sorry about. You have the opportunity to empower these parents and to give them the confidence and knowledge that they need. Please don't feel obliged to overwhelm parents with knowledge. Everybody reacts differently, and so it's obviously critical that you respond to each parent's needs individually. But I can remember when Tom was a few days old being told the things he wouldn't be able to do, which was completely irrelevant. And, it's good just to focus on the here and now, although obviously if parents ask for information, then to respond accordingly. Do refer parents to local support groups and online forums such as PADS, where there's a plethora of information and support available to them. And please be respectful. Don't ask new parents whether or not they had the tests. Whatever the outcome is irrelevant. Look at each baby as an individual and don't generalise. We hear all too often of parents being told, you know, Down's babies won't do this, or kids with Down syndrome will go to special school. Nobody knows the future for any child, and that's still the case with a baby with Down syndrome. We know that of those women who discover baby has Down syndrome whilst pregnant, that 90% go on to terminate. I know I could have fallen into that 90%, and that terrifies me. How many women every day are making life-death decisions with little, if any, accurate advice, information and support? The paradox is that in a study of 2,000 families, 99% of people with Down syndrome advise they're happy with their lives, and 97% of family members love their relative with Down syndrome. Much higher than the typical population, I suspect. In another study of over 3,000 parents from more than 50 countries, it showed that whilst 25% of new parents considered Down syndrome a tragedy on being given a positive test result, given time, only 0.68% felt the same way. I've known from my own experience, and indeed that of hundreds of families I'm in contact with, that there's an expectation by many medical practitioners for expectant women to terminate. In 2018, I conducted a survey of 1,410 women who've had a baby with Down syndrome in the UK, and last year published the results. Of 206 expectant women being given the result baby has Down syndrome, the termination was offered in the same conversation to 68%. Many were even given the time and date it had been booked in. There's much talk about women making informed choices, but the reality is this is all too often not happening. The following clip features women who have gone on to have a baby with Down syndrome, despite pressure to do otherwise.
I was given just 20 minutes to decide whether I wanted to keep my baby.
I said, no, we wouldn't be interested in having an amniocentesis. And her words to me were, women like you make me sick. Why bother having screening if you're not going to do anything about it?
The first thing she said to me were, if you come in and see us this week, we'll arrange a termination for you. She sat us down, told us all the negative things about having a child with Down syndrome. And she said, but you're only 28, you're both so young, you should terminate and start again.
On the phone, she asked me 5 times whether I wanted to get it taken care of, and those were her words, taken care of. She then asked me if I needed to ask my husband to make sure whether we wanted to get it taken care of or not.
They offered us a termination there and then at the scan, and they said he wasn't going to survive. We ended up having the amniocentesis, and 3 days later they told us that Zeffie had Down syndrome over the phone, and they asked if we wanted to interrupt the pregnancy, basically have a termination, which we said no to.
It's positive for Down syndrome. She paused and said, it's Friday, we're closing soon. You've got 20 minutes to decide whether you want an abortion or not. Every appointment I had from then on was negative. I was told bad news at everyone, doctor, midwife, or by nurse.
In all honesty, I think we must have been offered about 15 terminations, even though we made it really clear that that wasn't an option for us. But they really seemed to push and really seemed to want us to terminate.
The experience of these women is far from exceptional. Our survey found that of those receiving a positive result, after advising they were continuing with the pregnancy, almost half, 46%, were still offered a termination, 35% on more than one occasion. And of those with a high chance result, half had termination mentioned again, despite advising they were continuing the pregnancy. I hope this talk has been interesting, insightful and perhaps thought-provoking. It's easy to fall into a way of thinking, a single narrative. I would ask you to consider your language and perhaps challenge your perceptions and knowledge around Down syndrome. Take a look at our stories online to gain an understanding into the reality of our lives and of living with Down syndrome in modern Britain. I'd very much welcome the opportunity to work with you to ensure new and expectant parents receive the care, support and information that they deserve. Many thanks.